I've talked about this before, but I find nostalgia to be a very interesting topic to discuss. It's pretty often that I revisit memorable childhood stories from my formative years. I know this attitude is often demeaned as being overly sentimental and childish, as trying to recapture something that just can't be recaptured. And there is good grounds for this criticism. Just look at half the content being put out by the Minecraft community nowadays. But I do believe that there is a healthier way to approach nostalgia. We should revisit old stories not to recapture anything, but to rediscover something. Something both in ourselves and in the stories. We call these stories formational, don't we? If we remember them fondly enough to revisit them, they probably left an imprint on us. Help to form us in who we are. And there's nothing childish about wanting to find and understand these imprints. What's more mature than knowing where you come from? So, I come from Little Root Town. My Pokemon phase wasn't a long period of my childhood, but when I was in it, I was hooked with the franchise. The games, the cards, the show, they practically became my entire life for a year or two. But new games weren't coming out quick enough to sustain my interest, and my limited allowance made collecting cards kinda difficult, so the primary way I engaged with the franchise was with the anime. This was around the time when the Black and White series was just wrapping up, and when X and Y was just beginning. But my family didn't have cable, so I couldn't watch most of the newer episodes. Instead, I used Pokemon TV to watch older seasons, and the Advanced series was my particular favorite. It probably had something to do with my excitement on the upcoming Hoenn remakes, which became the first games I completed fully, but in any case, when I think back on the Pokemon anime, this is the series that first comes to my mind. I remember being so captivated by the idea of a Pokemon journey. And honestly, I still find them really cool. Even as I now recognize how ridiculously naive the concept is, that's just part of its appeal. The idea of just traveling across a country, not free from danger, but equipped to handle it. Having basically the entire world set up to support your adventure, working on your own self-improvement while constantly meeting likewise trainers. It's all such a perfect setup for a coming-of-age story. A type of story that is pretty clearly something I like. And that's exactly what I expected to watch when I revisited the Advanced series. I remembered May's 180 character arc, all the exciting places the group visited, and the exhilaration of a Pokemon battle. And then I rewatched part of its first season and found out that it really wasn't the show I remembered. Now, I want to make it clear here that I am not writing this to hate on the Advanced series. It's not a bad show at all, and if I misremembered it, that's my fault, not the fault of the show. But it isn't the epic coming-of-age journey of my memory. It's just a very simple, very episodic series. Most episodes are really plot-driven and formulaic, just focusing on some episodic hijinks involving Team Rocket. The characters I remember so well have their moments, but they don't feel like the focus of the show, just as conduits to frame the plot. And the same can largely be said about the journey itself. There are some character-driven episodes littered throughout the show, but those are the exception, not the rule. Now, none of this makes the show bad. I can actually understand why I enjoyed it so much as a child, but I have moved past its appeal. The nostalgia I felt for it ran out once I had reheard all the familiar sound effects and musical cues, and rewatched the theme song once or twice. So the imprint it left on me turned out to be more of a phantom than anything else. And that would have been that. It should have been that. I thought my brief re-excursion into the Pokemon franchise would have ended once I left disappointed from my childhood show. But I was bored one night and decided to look into the broader opinions of the anime. and found out that X and Y was considered far and away the peak of the series. Now, I had seen just a few XY episodes here and there, and really didn't remember much. But I thought, what the hell, and watched some of the first season. And guys, this show is peak. From what I've seen of it so far, X and Y is a show that knows what the main appeal of Pokemon is, and is actively trying to capture that. It doesn't capture it perfectly, but it gets pretty close. The story of this series is the journey that these characters go on. It's not just a narrative device used to allow for hijinks to occur. The character-driven adventures are the central appeal of the show. And these characters live up to that appeal. They're entertaining, mature enough to drive the plot forward, interesting enough for their arcs to resonate, and all have unique dynamics with each other. Bonnie is basically just a younger version of Ash. Clement and Serena are similarly soft-spoken and trying to move out from their parents' shadows. Ash and Clement are mutually inspired by the other. Serena pretty quickly adopts a guardianship role with Bonnie, and the connections between Clement and Bonnie and Selena and Ash are pretty obvious. Point is, the writers were really intelligent with creating this group. They all bounce off each other and support each other in consistently engaging ways. And it's not like every episode pushes these characters' arcs forward. There are a lot of what could be called filler episodes, but even these are adventurous and centrally focused on the characters, and many of them still turn out to be really interesting stories, or at least really funny ones.
How did they get in?
This isn't your truck!
Prepare for trouble! I'd say you bad people have finally met your match!
And make it a double crook catch to protect You're thieves!
Copyright infringement! Get away from him!
Now, I do think there are a fair amount of dud episodes, but I'll gladly put up with them for the good ones, especially the handful of great episodes. I'll also note that, technically speaking, X and Y is miles ahead of any other Pokemon series I've watched. The art direction sells Kalos beautifully, and the animation is very high quality. I'm not the first to note that previous Pokemon seasons pretty clearly had some budget restraints, what with how every battle seemed to start and end with this animation of Pikachu using Thunderbolt. But the battles of X and Y are choreographed to perfection. The writers did a great job of portraying them as spectacles you'd actually want to watch as a fan. Trainers develop inventive strategies, moves are constantly comboed together in interesting ways, and the environment is always being played with. All this creates a really cool display of putting brains and bronze together. So, as you can probably tell, I really like this show. It still shows its hands at times of being a kid's show. The wackier and more ridiculous plotlines aren't really my favorite, but then it'd be pretty ridiculous for me to complain about a kid's show being a kid's show. More importantly, strange as it sounds, I found myself experiencing those same nostalgic sentiments I expected to feel from the Advanced series. This is odd. Again, I hardly watched any of X and Y growing up. None of these characters or sound effects were a recognizable part of my childhood, and yet none of that stuff made the difference at the end of the day. What I do have from my childhood experiences of Pokemon, whether or not it was actually in the media I consumed, was the call to adventure at a new beginning. The almost mystical harmony found between people and nature, the joy of a group journeying together, and the excitement of a good-natured duel. All of that is distinctly present, albeit not perfectly, in the X and Y series. And I think this can teach us two lessons. The first is that if you're aching for nostalgic sentiments from your childhood, it might be a good idea to watch something you've never watched before. I realize how self-contradictory that sounds, but in my experience, it can be a great way of rediscovering those nostalgic imprints. The second lesson, which is really just an expansion from the first, is that those nostalgic sentiments you may carry with you, which may feel closely aligned to a piece of media, may ultimately have more to do with you than with any story. That ultimately forgettable book, show, or game was possibly just a conduit to give you a glimpse of that sentiment, that you then discovered on a deeper level. Nostalgia may have, over the years, grafted that sentiment tightly onto a forgettable story, but that doesn't mean the sentiment is as fake or irrelevant or immature as was the story. Other artists may have discovered that sentiment, and they may have done it the justice it deserves.